you concentrate continuous improvement in the hands of just a few specialists, right, you're going to limit the amount of impact that you have. And if you're just running discrete projects versus building a system, well, that's also going to constrain, how far you can spread these gains. If you want to absolutely terminate your continuous improvement effectiveness, it would be by laying off people because of continuous improvement. Why would any employee want to participate if they thought their job was going to be at risk if they made improvements?
Welcome to KPI Fireside. Our mission is simple: to improve companies and to improve careers through continuous improvement. In every episode, we explore the spark, the moment, the mindset, or the method that ignites real change. Whether you're just starting out or leveling up, you'll find the insights and inspiration to fuel your next improvement. Welcome back to KPI Fireside, a continuous improvement podcast. I am your host, Keith Norris. Our guest today is Jess Orr. Jess is a business transformation leader who leverages her extensive background in continuous improvement and lean principles. She was particularly influenced by her experience working directly for Toyota in Georgetown, Kentucky. While many executives treat transformation as a simple rollout of new tools, Jess argues that true change requires a fundamental shift in leadership mindset. Her recent LinkedIn article on building an organizational problem-solving culture sparked today's conversation about why so many corporate change initiatives fall flat. Jess, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Keith. It's great to be here. I'm a big fan of the podcast, so I've been really looking forward to our conversation today.
Awesome. I appreciate that. I'm been looking forward to this one for a lot. As I mentioned there, some of your blog posts caught my attention, and I thought you had such an interesting story. One of the things we like to do in the podcast here is start with the spark. I find a lot of people in this discipline have like a moment where they realize like, hey, this is what I want to do when I grow up. So for you, what was that moment where you had that spark?
Yeah, that was certainly true for me. So, I'm a mechanical engineer by training. My first job out of college, I quickly discovered I didn't want to be sitting behind a computer doing AutoCAD all day. So, really, I love being out on the production floor. So I took a role as a manufacturing engineer. And my boss asked me one day if I wanted to go to Six Sigma black belt training. And I had no idea what that was, but I knew it involved a lot of statistics. And even though I'm a math minor, I hated my statistics class in college. So I was like, I don't know if I want to do this, but he thought it would be a good idea. So I went, and the training was amazing. I got to actually see how you can apply statistics to the real world to improve processes. In my first project, I was like, wow, this is really cool. So really that's kind of started the spark. And then what really solidified it was when I had the opportunity to work for Toyota in Georgetown, Kentucky. It was just a transformative experience. I remember the two principles of respect for people and Kaizen were ones that I just grasped immediately and had a tremendous impact on me, not only then, but also through the roles that I took in my career after I left Toyota. So I guess in short, saying yes to that black belt training kind of just changed the course of my career, and I'm so glad that I did.
I think that's such an interesting uh, journey there, and I think that's a similar pattern that I've seen in other places. Is there's this opportunity presented to you, and I've heard, hey, do you want to go do this black belt thing? And people are like, what does karate have to do with my career?
Exactly.
So sometimes it's like this new thing that you get open to. But for you, so you did that training. Was that before you went to Toyota, or was that?
Yeah, it was. Which kind of a funny story about that because when I went to Toyota, I remember asking my manager, I was like, well, my Six Sigma black belt training, and we learned the DMAIC process, so I'm going to use that for this project. And he goes, well, here at Toyota, actually, we use A3 problem solving, so why don't we send you to that training? So they didn't really use Six Sigma at Toyota. I learned pretty quickly, but it's still obviously what they did worked very well.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I sometimes I think of it like recipes, like my grandma might have a meatball recipe with tomato sauce, but it's totally different from yours.
Right.
We kind of call it the same thing. And so that's interesting. What was it like getting hired on at Toyota, and how long were you there?
I was there for about 3 or 4 years. Yeah, I started as a contractor actually. So I worked in there, did stamping die design, which had me back in front of the computer doing AutoCAD. So as soon as I had an opportunity to join the mass production team doing quality engineering, I took advantage of that. And gosh, it was just an amazing experience. I mean, everything that you read about Toyota, it's true. It was just, it was just interesting the kind of the servant leadership that I saw from my managers who really were truly invested in my growth and development. And just, learning about the culture, learning about the tools that they used, it had an impact on me for the rest of my life.
So when because you did have some previous experience to this discipline of Lean Six Sigma, continuous improvement, and then going to Toyota, it sounds like there were some, I guess, just even terminology or process stuff where it was like, we don't do it that way, we do it this way. Are there some other notable ones where you had like some of these preconceptions of what it was, but at Toyota it was something different?
Yeah, it was, I mean, I kind of would say it was almost like stepping into a new world entirely. Like anything that I had learned previously, I had to almost unlearn and learn it the way that Toyota did it. I remember, and they would use Japanese terminology all the time. So I had to learn those terms and really what the meaning was behind them. I remember one time I was, trying to implement a process change, and my manager asked me, he's like, "Well, did you Nima washi?" I'm like, "What is Nima washi? I don't know what you're talking about." And he said, "It's basically building consensus. It's preparing the soil for a change by making sure you talk to all stakeholders, get their input and their buy-in, and adapt as needed." So there was some culture shock there, but it was fun to kind of learn new things and what the meaning was behind the terms that they used.
That's one of the things I find so interesting when I work with companies in different industries. I think a lot of people think that because they work somewhere for a while and that's the way that that company did it, that that's kind of the way everybody does it. And so you go into somewhere new and you're like, why aren't you doing it this way? This is the way we did it over there. That's like the way to do it. And it's kind of this like rude awakening sometimes, or eye opening, like, wow, things are kind of like a little bit different almost everywhere.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And different, I think, in a good way, or at least in a way that you've got to acknowledge if you're going to have an impact in that organization. Like what got you here is not necessarily going to be what that organization needs, right? You've got to adapt it. I remember when I was at the company I joined after Toyota, and I was trying to learn the processes. So I was out on the floor, I was talking to a die cutter operator. I was like, "Hey, I wanna understand more about your work, can I look at your standard work?" And he just looks at me like, "What are you talking about standard work?" I was like, "Well, how did you learn how to do your job?" He was like, "Well, Bob over who's been here 20 years taught me how to do it." So, I mean, that quickly told me, okay, I'm in a different environment, right? I can't make assumptions about, what they have at Toyota they may not have here, and we may need to start with where the organization is at. So, that was definitely a bit of a shock, but I adapted.
So I know you've got an interesting story about the the process and the facts around like leaving Toyota. Let's go back to that point for a minute. And what was it that led you to? I mean, it sounds like you had a great experience there at Toyota. What was your mindset of, okay, I'm ready to move on to something else? And then take us through that. To you
Yeah.
mentioned some rude awakenings when you left.
Yeah, it was a couple of things. So I didn't want to leave Toyota. I thought, I was being targeted for senior management. I thought I was going to spend the rest of my career there. But life happens. I needed to move to a different state to be closer to family. So in thinking about my next role, I said, Toyota didn't have like full-time continuous improvement people because, it's part of everyone's job every day, but I knew I enjoyed doing what I did so much and that aspect of the culture. So I wanted a full time role in continuous improvement. So I joined a company as a black belt doing just that. And they were probably about 5 to 10 years since they started their continuous improvement program. So they were pretty early on the journey. And that was, just like you said, a rude awakening. It was interesting because if I had gone in with the mindset of, well, I'm the expert, I used to work at Toyota, therefore I'm going to show everyone what they need to do, that wouldn't have worked. I really had to learn myself and adapt my approach. And we talk about with problem solving, you always got to understand the current state before you try to improve things. And that's exactly what I did. It was funny. I've heard a lot of Toyota alumni have this similar experience, but my manager told me one day, she goes, "I want you to run a SMED event." And I look at her, I'm like, "What is SMED? Like, what are you talking about?" And she's like, "Oh, it's from Toyota, you know." I was like, "Oh, so it stands for single minute exchange of die. It's a setup production, right, to reduce the amount of time it takes to change over a machine." So I was like, "I guess I can go learn how to run a SMED event since I've never done that before." So I really listened to a lot of podcasts, read a lot of books, made a lot of mistakes, but ultimately it was a good experience for me to really solidify what I had learned at Toyota.
I find that as one of the endlessly interesting things is the tales of Toyota that get told, and talking to somebody who's like, I don't remember that. That was a little different than my experience, but
Yeah,
some
exactly.
of these things get passed down as like, just the gospel, you might say. I'm curious if you have some insights on lessons that people can learn about how to grow and evolve their program. I know some people are working inside small businesses. Maybe they've got 20 or 30 employees and they're just like kind of getting turned on to this idea of lean. And then some people are in like the multi-billion dollar organizations and they've got pretty good corporate structure and they've got site champions and things. What was your experience in how the program evolved or changed? Did it make some significant changes in that time you were there?
Yeah, it did. And I was kind of at like a transition point in the program when I joined. So when they started, and I think this is, failure mode to some extent for companies to watch out for. So they started with strictly like a Six Sigma approach. So they had full-time black belts, and then some employees would get trained on green belt training, and they would run discrete projects. And the main goal was saving money.
Hmm.
And they did that for, 5 to 10 years. So I kind of entered at the tail end of that approach. And it had limited success. And, here's why. If you concentrate continuous improvement in the hands of just a few specialists, right, you're going to limit the amount of impact that you have. And if you're just running discrete projects versus building a system, well, that's also going to constrain, how far you can spread these gains. And it was a failure mode I actually witnessed personally and was involved with. It was part of the failure mode. So we had this assembly site, they were losing money, and leadership was talking about closing the site. And so, like a last ditch effort, the vice president said, "Hey, Jess, can you go run a black belt project, see what you can do in 3 months? No pressure, right? Just 200 people's jobs." I went in, understood the current state. They had some big gaps when it came to setup efficiency. They had no fuss. They had a ton of scrap. So we did the things that a black belt did, and focus on engaging the people. I think that was definitely a focus too. And we were able to improve profitability enough that they decided to keep the site. So it sounds like a win success story, but here's the rest of the story. So the site was up for renewal in 2 years, the contract. And over that 2 years, they slowly regressed back to where they were when I started the project. And they actually ended up deciding not to keep the site after 2 years, which was really unfortunate. But, I learned some lessons from that in retrospect that I think are applicable on a broader scale too. So, I ran it as a discrete project. So I was there for 3 months and then I left. They had a very strong general manager. She was super supportive, super engaged. So I thought, she's got this. And I think she tried, but there wasn't a system in place to actually maintain the progress that we made, to sustain those gains, and then also to build on them. And so, for one thing that I've learned, if I could recommend this to people, is that you've got to have a dedicated person who's focused on continuous improvement at these sites when you're starting. You may not need that, when you're more mature along the journey,
Yeah.
like Toyota was, but you've got to have that. And when I became the manager for that division, the OPEX manager, I told my vice president that, and he's like, "So you want me to hire 16 people?" I said, "Yes, I do." He's like, "So you need to show me where I'm going to get the benefit from that." So I actually looked outside of my division and did some data analysis on the sites that had a full-time CI resource and the ones that didn't, and the difference in the money they saved. And it was pretty obvious, the sites that had those dedicated resources were definitely more productive. They were saving more money. So I was able to justify that investment. And we slowly kind of ramped up the number of CI resources we had. But it was also important that we had a support system in place for those resources too. So my divisional team of practitioners would offer, they'd give coaching and support to those CI leaders at the sites too. So it was important that we kind of had at both approaches.
I love that. So just to recap that, this is a topic that I talk about occasionally on the podcast, but I talk in one-on-one conversations with people even more. The idea of the structure of the CI program, because you touched on something that I think people hear and then they believe like, oh, we're just going to do it like Toyota. So Toyota has a, let's just say, a very mature CI culture where, according to what you said, apparently they may not have like a specific person at each site for CI because everybody's kind of doing it. But between, hey, we just acquired this new plant, it's now part of our company that has some CI stuff going on, but these guys haven't really done it like that before. And we need to take them from, you know, kind of ground zero, you might say. Like they've just got good managers who try to do a good job, but they're struggling on some of their numbers. Sounds like you're recommending you need to have somebody with some responsibility for CI at the site.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I experienced that firsthand. So I was the vice president of a division eventually in my company. And for whatever reason, I couldn't get, approval to get the headcount addition. We were definitely in cost savings mode to have those full-time CI resources. So like I'm a person who's done CI for 15 years, right? You should think that I'd be capable of building that within my division. And as a leader, like even if you have good intentions, like your attention is just pulled in so many different directions. And it's hard to really give CI the focus that you need to in terms of building culture. So I experienced that failure mode firsthand.
This is something that resonates with me and just so true. The mantra in my head is if you don't have one, you are one. If you don't have a person to mow your lawn, you are the person to mow the lawn. If you don't have a nanny to watch your kids in the afternoon, you are the person to watch the kids, right? If you don't have somebody responsible for CI at your site in your location, you are the person. And the reality is most people have so many other responsibilities that becomes just a sliver. So that's one of those things I resonate with. I advocate for how important it is to have a CI leader at a site. And I think that's where there's opportunities for people in this discipline because there is a need for people to help drive that at the site level. Now you went through the experience of advocating for 16 hires. You had to probably put a business case together or something, or like kind of say, hey, this is what we're going to get out of it. How did you how did you justify that? I don't know, was it a year later or 3 months later or some period of time you had to go back and probably be accountable to what those people were doing? How did you put that? What was like the structure of that ROI analysis?
Yeah, we'll get into the details of it. I love this stuff. So what I did was the first thing I did was there were sites that had dedicated CI resources outside of my division. Not all of them, but there were some. So I looked at those sites and I said, okay, based on sales, so what is their productivity savings as a percentage of sales compared to the sites that don't have one? And I think it was like a 5% difference, right? There was obviously greater cost savings among those sites. And then I also looked at like their average machine efficiency performance too, and saw that there was a statistically significant difference in the sites that had a CI resource. So that was enough to justify two hires. So I said, let's do two hires at our two biggest sites. Let's, give it a year, see if we're seeing the impact compared to the other 14 sites in the division. And it was like night and day in terms of the impact that we saw in their improvement. So from there, I was able to hire, I think, six more, and then eventually we were able to staff up all the sites. But using the data to show leadership, it can't be just touchy feely. Like you and I know, just based on our experience, this is the right thing to do. But you have to bring the data to kind of show the impact that's going to have.
I love that you're talking about cost savings because cost savings is the thing that we talk a lot about at KPI Fire, with customers. That's one of the things that we do pretty well. But I also think that there's like a lot of things in life, there's a middle ground that's probably best. You can be too extreme on cost savings where it's the only thing that matters. And then there's some other ways of justifying that ROI. Do you have like I don't know, a rule of thumb, like with those 16 people, what kind of ROI were you looking for in those hires and how long did you expect it would take versus the actual?
I actually have some very strong opinions on this subject, based on trial and error. So, if I kind of anchor on what Toyota did, so I didn't our improvements at Toyota, I had no idea how much money they saved because the focus was always for me in quality engineering, it was reducing the number of defects per vehicle. Like that was the standard that we lived or died on. And I mean, it's reasonable to say, all right, if you reduce the amount of defects per vehicle, you're going to reduce the amount of rework, the time taking those vehicles off the line, not selling them. Like there is financial benefit to it, but we didn't measure that directly. It was about the leading metric, in this
Yeah, the lean.
was the defects per vehicle. But in reality, many companies are just like you said, and what is the ROI on it? So I think there's a couple ways to look at it that we looked at. So we looked at hard savings and soft savings. So hard savings, I would describe that's what you see in your P&L, right? I reduced my indirect material spend as a percentage of my total cost of goods sold year over year. That's hard savings. And that's great when you can quantify that. And you should see an impact on those types of numbers if you're doing the right things with your CI program. But what I think you can't leave out are those less tangible type savings. We call them soft savings. So if you're reducing the time it takes to make a product, you're not laying that person off, but you're freeing up their time to make more product or to work on a different improvement. So I think hours saved is something to look at too. And also cost avoidance is an opportunity as well, where you might have thought that you were going to need to spend money on, say, a new warehouse, but you're able to optimize the layout of your facility so you didn't have to purchase that. And I think it's important to work closely with finance partners on quantifying this. One thing that we did that was a big hit is we created these standard savings calculators so people could, at the beginning of the project, say, all right, if I improve OEE by 5%, what does that equate to in soft savings? So that way we're actually able to quantify it from the beginning of the project and then at the end once we completed it.
I love that. You're definitely speaking my language with the savings calculator, and it is so interesting because you use the word lead measure, and particularly big organizations, right? You tend to have this like fairly narrow scope of the world when you're just kind of working in one piece of the value stream. Like you said, it's all about just reducing quality defects because that is true. If you reduce those sort of things, it is going to have an impact, but sometimes you can't see the impact that you have. And I like your mention about partnering with the folks in finance because the finance people are always the one that are in the room when those existential decisions are on the table. Like, hey, should we keep this plant open? Hey, should we keep these people around? I always find it a little bit sad when I hear about these huge layoffs happening because it always feels like, man, seems like somebody could have done something about that if they were more proactive about finding that extra capacity, putting it to good use, particularly now with AI being, so prevalent, hearing a lot about that. In your time at Toyota, where they're always working on improvements, are there any lessons regarding how to, let's say you save time? One of the things in this discipline is, oh yeah, we just saved so much time, we no longer need these 30 people. How was that sort of situation handled in Toyota, or how should it be handled?
I think the way that it was handled at Toyota, I would strongly recommend that other people replicate. If there's one thing you can copy and paste directly from Toyota, I think it's their approach to this. So I think in the entire time of Toyota's existence, they only had one layoff, and that was very traumatizing for the organization, the CEO. They did not want to do that. And ever since then, even during COVID, even during the economic crisis in 2009, they never laid off employees. And here's how they did it. So they had their variable workforce. They were usually people that they would evaluate for a couple of years and then bring on full time if they were a good fit for the company. But the intention of that variable workforce was that it would be flexible. That's why it's called variable. So in times of downturn, they would not use as many contractors, but they would retain their full time employees. And, if someone say they made so many improvements to a process that you eliminate the need for one person, well, then you repurpose that person to a different department or build their skills in a different area. You never lay them off. And I think if you want to absolutely terminate your continuous improvement effectiveness, it would be by laying off people because of continuous improvement. Why would any employee want to participate if they thought their job was going to be at risk if they made improvements? And I think that's going to become even more relevant in this age of AI, right? Where we're going to be streamlining a lot of processes and eliminating the need for a lot of people companies need to get creative about, how do we upskill these people so that they can move into a different area or kind of their job might change, right? But try to retain their talent because people, they really are the engine of the organization.
I think that's a great point and probably a good thing for us to talk a little bit about because I do know that a lot of jobs are changing, particularly the talk about AI right now is how the white collar jobs are a risk in this go around. For you personally, getting your black belt, that it sounds like that was something that was encouraged by your employer in your situation, right? I know some people have, just gone and got them on their own. What are your thoughts or advice on, pursuing the certifications available in this discipline for folks? How might that help them with their job security in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to, always stretch and grow, and right, and the more skills that you can develop, the more valuable you are to the organization. And I think, if, companies, I recommend having your own internal training where possible, and it doesn't have to be like a full black belt course. It could be, hey, we're going to train people on how to run Kaizen events, or we're going to train them on problem solving. I mean, those are the major skills, right, to build in someone the ability to scientifically solve problems. So I recommend not necessarily going for, green belt, black belt, but really saying, okay, what are the skills I need to be able to do my job more effectively? And I think too with, the onset of AI, I would definitely encourage people like this is coming, whether you like it or not, it's going to happen. So, start upskilling yourself when it comes to learning about generative AI or AI agents, right? That's going to make you more adaptable, more flexible to change as the landscape changes with these new technologies.
Yeah, so true. There's so many good. Again, we um, it's often said that it's not about the tools, it's about the culture, it's about the leadership, it's about the respect. Knowing the tools, and I would say like the methodologies, like I would even lump things like change management into like a skill of this discipline, right? It doesn't matter if you can draw the chart that shows the root cause if you can't get to basically building consensus and change management. I do think that's one thing that's encouraging for me about this discipline is having a future, you might say, is that with all the change that needs to happen in and around AI, particularly in enterprises, change happens slow and change happens through tactical projects, the kind of things that, we're talking about. Continuous improvement can happen at every level, but big change starts to sound a lot like project management and managing major initiatives. So being in the discipline of the people that are involved in those changes, I think is a good thing to build into your own tool belt of your career. When you've been working, I'm thinking about like the evolution of a career in this continuous improvement discipline. Let's say you're fairly early, you're doing a job, and somebody says, "Hey, you should go get a green belt or a belt of some kind," and then you get in and you're managing a project, and then maybe in your case, like you've done some continuous improvement, you start working in a bigger company, and now you go from the person doing individual projects to facilitating. I'm thinking kind of like the corporate staff function of continuous improvement, where your job is less about doing projects, more around facilitating, sharing. What are some things that shifted when you went from the person doing a project to working in that corporate role?
So I think the shift is I would liken it to the shift that many people experience from being an individual contributor to being a leader of people, right? Your job is not about doing the work as much as it is enabling other people and coaching them on how to do the work, really building them. So that's what I found was that, my role switched from being an enabler of other people, but I think you have to be careful with a coach, being a coach too, is you can't just say, okay, I think you should do X, Y, or Z, or, what's going to be your approach for this? Like if someone's never run a Kaizen event before, the way that you build their skills, I find the best way of doing it is you lead a Kaizen event with them, right? Kind of the way that we train people, right, is we tell, we show, and then we enable them to do, and then we give them feedback on how they did it. So that was kind of the hybrid approach I took. Sometimes I would lead a Kaizen event and have a couple of trainees with me. I think that works really well for problem solving too. If you're trying to teach people how to use A3 or any of the problem solving tools out there, let them work with you as you're solving a problem, leading a team, and then they can lead the next one. You can function as the coach, but really helping to guide them through that process. I will say, as much as I enjoyed running projects myself, it was 10 times more fulfilling to build that skill in other employees to do that and really see them become excited about it too.
I think that's true of I guess leadership in general. You get kind of like that extra satisfaction about seeing the light go on in somebody's eyes, figure out something that was frustrating or challenging them before, and then you see them like know how to solve it. There's definitely like a moment of satisfaction, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yes.
I actually have a brief story about that. It's probably like one of the most impactful moments in my career. But I was a practitioner at what we call the performance excellence system. So I would function as a coach. I would go into sites, I'd work with their CI leader on implementing the system. So I was not so much a doer as I was a coach. And in this one site, they were just really struggling with the performance excellence system. They were not buying into it. And I discovered that the person who was the most influential at that site was their operations manager. We'll call him Dale. So Dale was like this ex-military guy, and he was very cranky. He'd sit in the back of the room with his arms folded. And I was like, all right, Dale and I'm going to become friends with Dale, right? So my dad was in the military, so we kind of bonded over that a bit and really worked to like understand him and his motivations. So one thing he really cared about was protecting his people, and he was worried that this continuous improvement stuff was going to be a drain on their time. So I said, what if we ran some setup reduction events? So we could, reduce the amount of time to set up, and we can take that time and allocate it back to continuous improvement. He's like, "Okay, we'll try it." So we tried it, it worked, and he saw his people starting to get excited about improving their work every day. And something he told me when it was time for me to leave that site, he called me Miss Jess, but he goes, "Miss Jess," he's like, "I just wanna let you know, I really appreciate it. You saw the good in me and you pulled it out." And that to me, I was like, "Wow, this is like a way to actually like transform people's lives through what we do."
Yeah.
I mean, how cool is that?
I love that story. That resonates with me so much because I just had an experience over the weekend. I was with some kind of casual friends, and somebody said something about the comment came out like all jobs are kind of terrible and you just have to do it. And I was I heard this comment. I'm like, well, my job's not terrible. I kind of like my job. Like I kind of enjoy what I do. Like, why is it that some people feel like work or their job is this thing that is just unchangeable and it's never going to get better and it's just something to be endured? Whereas some people are like empowered, like the switch flips and they're like, yeah, this sucks. I don't like this. This is annoying or frustrating, but I know that I can do something about it. And I think seeing that it's almost like going from dark to light. Like there's this moment that you see happen with people where all of a sudden they realize that they go from just enduring to like, oh, I can make changes. I think your story kind of captures that insight. That's great.
I think it's incredibly empowering. I mean, I've got a number of stories like that. Or one person told me, "He's like, I feel like I'm a better person because of this continuous improvement stuff." And I think there's a psychological layer to this. Like Daniel Pink talks about the three things that motivate people, and it's autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And I think engaging them in continuous improvement is a way to help meet those fundamental human needs. So it's not just about improving processes; it's about improving people.
Yeah, we hear that that theme exists all the time too. Like respect for people. Stephen Covey has this discussion about values versus principles. Like you can choose to value a value, but principles are things that are just permanent and unchanging. I think respect for people is one of those things. And I think a lot of the core values of this discipline of continuous improvement, obviously they're good for the organization because and that's why we do the cost savings, but there's such a layer where they're good for the individuals to have that autonomy, mastery, and purpose to where they actually feel like they have some control and some ability to influence their job in the future. And it is, I think it's just good for the soul. I love that you picked up on that and shared that insight. Are you struggling to ignite real change in your continuous improvement program? Firestarter is your field guide. Real stories, proven strategies, no fluff. Get it now on Amazon. There was one thing that I wanted to ask you about. It had to do with a blog post that you had about the A3 experience, because I think this kind of builds on the idea of go from being a disengaged, unmotivated employee to feeling like, oh, maybe I can make a difference. And then so you go and you share an idea, you put something forward, and then somebody says, that's not good enough. We're not doing it now. How do you keep people, as a leader, how do you keep people engaged? Like you might say, you open up Pandora's box, like, hey, you're empowered now, but you can't do anything you want. Like, how do you put some, keep the initiative fired up, but also like, keep some reins on it, I guess.
Yeah, so the suggestion box kind of things that can go wrong with those.
Yeah.
So I think a couple of things that I've seen that are good practices for that. So I love the idea of the employee improvement ideas, but you have to have a system in place for how you vet those ideas, how you decide which ones you're going to go forward with, and then how you respond to people and explain to them if their idea is one that doesn't make it onto the list of things you're going to move forward with. So what our sites would do is they would have kind of like a project idea funnel, or it could be, a Kaizen funnel, depending on the scope of the idea, how much of an effort it needed to execute it. So everything went into that funnel. Employee ideas, project ideas based on like their top cost savings opportunities all went into this giant funnel. And then every quarter, they would evaluate everything in that funnel and they would kind of rank it based on, what's the benefit if we execute this improvement? What's the amount of effort required? What resources do we have available to implement the project or the Kaizen? And you'd get a ranking of everything, right? So you have, we're going to go after the top 10 after we rank everything. So everything that's left over, you either don't have the resources or the benefits not there, and you just be transparent with that list. I mean, show that list to people and say, we have limited resources and time. These are the projects and the ideas that we picked. The others will, cycle back into the hopper during the next kind of evaluation session. We're not forgetting about them, but we're not going to move forward with these right now. And I think people generally respond pretty well to that when they know that you considered the idea, you've got a thought process around how you evaluated them, and kind of the results are, you can only run so many projects. So the ideas that you selected are the ones that have the highest benefit.
Yeah, like you use the term, the idea funnel. I've heard like Project Hopper as a place where people can see what has been shared, or what, ideas that are there, and that their idea didn't just get lost in the suggestion box, buried in the suggestion box that nobody ever checks, but can actually get responded to. I think that's definitely a best practice.
I'll add to that though and say that if an employee has an idea that you find out about that's relatively easy to implement, maybe it's not high benefit, but it's something that would make their life easier or less frustrating. Like as a leader, just go do it, right? Because that's going to have an immediate impact on their morale. I remember I was doing a Gemba walk one day, and I asked an employee, "What's something that's really frustrating about your job?" It's one of my favorite questions. And he told me, he's like, the FedEx, when we have to do overnight shipments, they come at 4 p.m. every day. We're supposed to get off at 3. So when I have an overnight shipment, I have to wait until 4. I'm like, well, that stinks. Let's call FedEx and see if they could pick up at 2 p.m., maybe instead of 4 p.m. And it was an easy change to make, right? So if that doesn't need to go into the hopper, right, we could make that change the next day. I think we made it.
I love that. That just do it. You touched on something I want to come back to, with if continuous improvement is getting introduced the first time, there tends to be this like initial reaction where it's like, hey, we're going to do this continuous improvement thing. We're going to improve stuff. And then somebody says, we want you to go improve stuff. And you're like, okay, what do you mean? But you had a question right there. You said it's a question you like to ask, that I think is a great one for people to, have at the ready, because not everybody can always come up with something that they want to improve right now, but most people can come up with something that frustrates them.
I've never had silence when I ask that question. Or another version of it would be, what are your pain points? My manager taught me that question at the company I joined after Toyota, and it's been really effective.
Yeah, that's a great one. Well, Jess, I've got a handful of what I just call the rapid fire questions here. So these are just kind of top of mind answers, word or sentence sort of thing. So just kind of first thing that comes to mind. The most important job of a leader is to.
Create other leaders. One of my mentors told me that, and that always stuck with me. He said that that is your most important job.
So true, so true. Do you have a favorite go-to problem-solving tool that you turn to quite frequently?
I love process mapping, and I will almost every improvement opportunity I have will use a process map. Even at Toyota, embedded within the A3 problem solving process was a process mapping tool. And I like it because you engage a lot of people. People who are the experts on the process. And in the process of mapping out the current process, you almost always find those pain points as you're doing that activity. So that's definitely one of my go tos.
I love that answer. I've told people that work closely with me, my love language is flowcharts. So if you want to communicate something to me, just draw me a picture. That's the best way. And then if they're trying to explain something to me, I'll say, "Could you bring a picture so I can understand?"
Like a napkin, something.
Yeah, yeah, whatever. It can be a simple one, but there's something powerful about drawing something out like that where the insights just like kind of scream at you like this is where the problem is. So
The
good.
other thing it does too is it gets people focused on the process and not on people. So it's not like
Yeah.
Joe always forgets to bring me those invoices, right? It's like, well, we mapped the whole order entry process, right? What in the process is failing, not what people are failing to. So the tool helps to facilitate that mindset.
Oh, that's such a good insight there to ties back to respect and
Yeah.
focus on the process. Attack the process, not the people. That's a great lesson. Is there a book that you keep as a handbook or a manual or that you recommend, maybe even just one that you're interested in recently?
Yeah, a couple. So when we did our A3 problem solving certification at Toyota, they gave us Managing to Learn by John Shook, which really is a very engaging book for walking you through the problem solving process, which is really a journey of learning. So I definitely recommend that one. And then another one, which I think is not quite as well known, although it's a great book, is called The Toyota Engagement Equation by Tracy and Ernie Richardson. So, the Toyota Way is a great book, but it was written by someone outside of Toyota who studied Toyota. Tracy and Ernie were team members at Toyota, and they really delve in deep to like what that culture was actually like and the lessons that you can extract from that. So I recommend that one too.
Excellent. Excellent. I love a good book recommendation. Do you have a favorite question?
I think one of my favorite questions is what would need to be true to make this happen? So a lot of times when running Kaizen events or improvement projects, you get a bunch of reasons why we can't make a change or why we can't improve the process. And I try to like shift people's mindset with that question saying, okay, we're living in an imaginary world, right? Like what would need to be true? And they start coming up with, okay, did X or Y, and then we kind of break it down to, okay, well, maybe we can do that, right? So getting people to break outside of their mental models and constraints, I find that question to be helpful.
I like that. That's a great one. Finish this sentence. Continuous improvement is.
The relentless pursuit of perfection. And I think that that kind of sets the mental concept that we're never going to get there, but we're going to keep striving to get better every day.
Is there something that you believe that you feel like is maybe not a common belief about your work, this discipline, something that makes you successful, puts your perspective on the world that you base your belief on?
I think that failure is okay. It's more than just okay. It should be expected as part of the process. I could do a whole podcast episode on like all the things that I screwed up in continuous improvement. And I'm so glad that I did because every time I failed at something, I learned from it. I applied that to the next time that I did it. And I think that one of the barriers for people in trying to make improvements is they're afraid that they're going to fail, right? And letting them know that that's okay. That's part of the process. That's how people learn could
Yeah.
really help to break down that barrier.
Yeah, I think that's a great lesson in so many ways. Yeah. Do you have a prediction on the future of this discipline, this continuous improvement, maybe something related to AI and where that's going?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know AI is all the buzz lately and for good reason. I think there's two ways that AI is transforming continuous improvement and will continue to do so. So one is most people are familiar with generative AI. So that's the large language models. That is a super powerful tool for, inputting like what is the problem that you're trying to solve? What are some ways that other companies have solved it? What are the best practices? LLMs are fantastic at doing that kind of work, or even just as a partner. If you're trying to figure out how to approach a problem or a situation, I use LLMs all the time for that. The other one that I think is really intriguing is agentic AI. So an LLM is kind of, it's not actually making improvement in the real world. You're just talking with it. But agents can actually go out and improve processes autonomously themselves once you train them. So if you have an order entry process that's super manual, you can train an agent to go out and automate that process and do that work for you. So as we think about like we're generating process improvement ideas, where can we leverage AI agents as part of those solutions? I think it's absolutely going to transform how we think about continuous improvement.
So true. And just another good reason why process mapping is so key is to understand where those cues are at, where those waiting times are at, where those manual steps are at. That's so good. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. For anybody that might want to get in touch with you, are you available on LinkedIn, or do you want to share? You've got a blog. Do you want to share your blog address or
Yeah,
anything?
thank you. So LinkedIn, if you search for Jess Orr, I should come up. There's not too many of us out there. So I think the /LinkedIn /Jess Orr. I do have a leadership blog that I post on, and that's Jess Orr 11 at blogspot.com.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I love your perspective, and just some of the lessons that you shared and insights are so great. So thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Keith.
You bet. You bet. And for our listeners, if you'd like to ask a question or suggest a guest or just give us any ideas for episodes or content, you can reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn as well, Keith Norris. And this concludes this episode of KPI Fireside, a continuous improvement podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to add a comment. You can like, follow, subscribe on all the socials, and share the podcast with your friends or colleagues who are as passionate about continuous improvement as you are. And you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, keep driving progress and sparking change. This episode is brought to you by KPI Fire, the all-in-one platform for continuous improvement. With KPI Fire, you can align strategy, drive execution, and engage your people. So whether you're leading a team or driving enterprise-wide change, KPI Fire helps you deliver real results. Learn more at www.kpifire.com.